and legal issues around this as well. So the first mistake we always hear is people will tell us that we've noted that they don't keep up with changes in the law or new available strategies. And this is a huge issue when it comes to working with caregiver families as it looks to legal documents, making sure those things are not up to date. You know, believe it or not, laws change all the time. There are changes to federal laws, state administration laws, and even local court rules that impact this area of planning. And so because that changes all the time, we want to make sure that documents keep up with family changes and changes in the law. It is not uncommon that we will find that clients, you know, maybe someone was in one state and now they've moved with another child in a different state. So while they have documents, they have not kept up with those changes or changes in family dynamics. This also really impacts many legal documents that deal with healthcare issues. So healthcare power of attorneys and property power of attorneys. These are really the legal documents that impact life of the caregiver while they're there. So who has the ability to make healthcare decisions for someone? Who has the ability to make financial decisions? And these documents, not only does the law impact them, but also whether or not institutions will accept these documents. And so we find often people don't keep up with those changes. And so making sure that you have healthcare directives, power of attorneys, and even those documents that handle disposition of an estate. So that can be very, very important. The second myth that we actually find, or the second mistake, is really not having a plan to avoid nursing home cost or long-term care. So what plan is in place if the person you're caring for with cognitive impairment has to go into a nursing home and we have long-term care cost? Many families can be destitute simply because of that. Nursing home expenses and long-term care expenses are out of control. Right here in the state of Virginia, nursing home costs on average, according to a Genworth study, are over $94,000 a year. That same study said that most families, if they have to deal with the nursing home cost or expense, they could be destitute in 13 weeks. So when we talk about long-term care expenses, what are we really talking about? You know, in-home care, adult daycare, assisted living, nursing home cost. All of these are places where we can receive long-term care. And I mentioned in-home care first because a lot of people don't think about that when it comes to long-term care. But basically and I know that I have an advanced group here today because we're talking to family caregivers. But for just to make sure we all have the same definition, if someone has a long-term care expense, it's because we need help with what we call activities of daily living. That's what we refer to them in this world. And so what are activities of daily living? Basically, it's anytime you need help with those activities, we have a long-term care. And we all know what activities of daily living, what those ADLs are: dressing, feeding, bathing, eating, all of those are ADLs. And if you need help with those things, you have a long-term care expense. And one of the mistakes to add to this we find that people make is they believe that right now, just because home care is appropriate or adult daycare or the current plan we have in place to pay for expenses works for the family and works for the person we're caring for, they often forget that care needs change and can change over time. So we also think about this. We want to remember that there are really only 5 ways to pay for long-term care. Now, anything you can think of, I can fit into one of these 5. What's the first way to pay for long-term care if we need it? Out of pocket, right? Our own money. Long-term care insurance. And I will tell you, I'm a big fan of long-term care insurance, but there are some concerns there. Medicare will pay for long-term care. Medicaid. And then there's a 5th way that in my world, I don't really consider a 5th way, but it's the Veterans Aid and Attendance Pension. And I want to briefly kind of touch on those for you today. Let's talk briefly about out of pocket, right? Now, you knew that if you needed long-term care, you could just write a check for it, right? But what's the problem with relying on our own money to pay for long-term care, right? $94,000 a year, right? And so again, we have to really look at planning. Most families, again, are destitute after a set amount of time. Long-term care insurance. As I said, I'm a big fan of long-term care insurance, but the issues we see with long-term care insurance, you don't need me to go through those, but money, of course, companies going out of business. And then unfortunately, a lot of people don't have long-term care insurance. And by the time they want it or need it, they can't qualify. Medicare, and I want to touch briefly on Medicare, because a lot of people will say to me, Attorney Lee, I don't have to worry about long-term care because I have, or the person I'm caring for has Medicare. But they're often confusing Medicare with this fourth way to pay for long-term care, Medicaid. But my clients never do because I have taught them this. Medicare ends with the word care. Typically, Medicare will only pay for about 100 days of long-term care. Also, Medicare is age, not asset specific. So when Bill Gates turns 65 years old next month, he will qualify for Medicare simply because he's 65 and someone cares about Bill Gates. But he probably will never qualify for Medicaid. Medicaid ends with the word aid, and their income and asset qualifications to be able to receive Medicare, and I will talk specifically about those. Now, this fifth way is Veterans Aid and Attendance Pension. Go ahead and do me a favor and raise your hand. Let me and let Alzheimer's Association know that you're listening, but raise your hand if you or the person that you're caring for is a veteran or a spouse or widow of a veteran. Let me see those hands being raised. And I want to see you raise those hands because first, I want to thank you for your service. Coming from a military family, I know that freedom is not free. And so I want to help you understand that there is a benefit available from the Department of Veteran Affairs. And the reason I'm noting that benefit is because it does impact the planning for long-term care. But in my world, because it is very limited, it often is not the best to help clients. But go ahead and note that if you qualify for that. So the most interesting, we talk about Medicaid. When we talk about Medicaid, there are typically a couple of rules to understand Medicaid. And really the rules are extremely, extremely, extremely limited in that belief. And so I want to go through that when we talk about Medicaid, because Medicaid typically has a couple of care rules. Medicaid typically will say, when we look at Medicaid, it will say that you have to be, first of all, their age and categorical restrictions for Medicaid. And then you have to be sick enough, and then you have to be broke enough to qualify for Medicaid. And so I want to talk about that. And so typically Medicaid, and looking at that, and when we meet with clients, there can be some very, very surprising results. So let's look at this first couple. This is Bill and Mary. Bill and Mary, and I guess my slide gave away the answer too quick, Tina, but Bill and Mary actually have, let's look at their assets. They have a home of about $500,000. They have some furnishings in the bank. They have a Mercedes-Benz. They have a savings account. They have a prepaid funeral and monthly income of about $7,000. Husband has $5,000 a month and wife has $2,000. So even though their assets are higher, when we look at Bill and Mary, do they actually qualify for Medicaid? And you see that they do. The second thing, couple, if we look at this, and I see my slides gonna give it away too soon, but this is a second couple, Charles and Nancy. If we're looking at Charles and Nancy, they only have assets of about $100,000. They have a home worth $35,000, a Crown Victoria, savings accounts, and retirement of $55,000. When we look at their monthly income, it's not as high as Bill and Mary's, but husband has $1,340, wife has $220,000. And the question is, does wife qualify for Medicaid? And she absolutely does not when we look at this slide. And so that, when we look at that just from a general perspective, the point is that there are many, many different results that can happen with Medicaid. And so here we always say that Medicaid planning is a trap for the unwary. And really those who plan and those who prepare actually do win. And so we have to make sure that we understand that. And the real mistake is not looking down the road in advance to make sure that we have a plan to pay for long-term care. Mistake number 3. And this mistake is very, very important to note because it says even when a family has planned, no one is aware of the plan or their duties and responsibilities. And this is often when we get the call for a long-term care plan, this is actually when we step up and we actually find that we're getting the call from caregivers. They don't know if there are any details. They don't know if mom or dad actually have medical directives. They don't know if they have power of attorneys. They really don't understand if there's a plan and then where those legal documents are, where those financial documents are. They don't know how to manage the end of life concerns. And so this really is a huge mistake for the family and in looking at that. So if a person is incapacitated, looking at the legal issues that have documents in place on who can manage affairs during incapacity. I can name many families I've met with, and the person is incapacitated. Unfortunately, we've even seen this during the pandemic. And someone calls us and they say, you know, my mom is in the hospital or she's contracted COVID-19 and we need to make decisions. Well, mom is already on a ventilator. And so we can't put documents in place to be able to make decisions for them. Or the person was blocked out of facilities during the pandemic and they wanted to have legal documents, but we couldn't access someone to sign those. So it's the job of the successor trustees, the executors, to make those decisions. So do you and those people behind you know what to actually do? The other issue is not just incapacity, but when someone passes away, who handles the funeral? Who handles with debts? Who deals with accounts? Do we know the plan in place when someone passes away? Now, I will share with you, and I hate to bring up a negative, because I know that I'm talking to caregivers and their families, but there's a very important survey that I want to bring to your attention because in our firm, often we work with families when something has happened to the caregiver. And so the mortality rate, according to an ARP study of caregivers, increases by 63%. Now, I know that is really not something that we like to think about as caregivers, but as families, we have to talk about this. So we've had situations where a person with dementia or cognitive impairment, they are stable because they have a primary caregiver, especially if that caregiver is a spouse. And then we as a firm are called to the table because the spouse has passed away before the person that they're caring for. And so it's very, very important to talk about that and even the issue of who can be the successor. The other thing we bring up as far as looking at this as a mistake is that when we talk about legacy, particularly if we're working with someone who has dementia or other related cognitive impairment, or even Alzheimer's, we want to look at the fact that the legacy they leave is more than the law, more than their legal assets. And so taking time as we prepare the estate to look at everything that's the legacy of the person and preparing for that. So putting that in place. Alzheimer's is going to keep working until there's a cure. But we want to make sure that we know as a family, we're preserving the legacy of everyone that we have to care for. And so also, what do we do about these mistakes? I know that being a caregiver is a difficult job. I always say that it's one of the main life events. When it happens, you know, if you get married, there's a party, you get a dress, you know, often you have a baby, there's a shower. Being a caregiver actually is a major life change, and it just happens to us. As someone who's been a caregiver, you just look up one day and your life has changed and you're caring for everyone or caring for someone. And so your life has significantly changed. And so I know that being a caregiver is busy, but we should never be too busy to stop and look at these events and look at these things that we actually have to do for a family. So there is no way in this presentation or even in our office, we do monthly webinars. There's no way in this format you can look at your own family situation. I know that Alzheimer's reach is much bigger than that of our law firm. And so this is not about you meeting with us, but taking time to audit your estate plan, taking time to audit the estate plan of the person you're caring for, taking time to look at the long-term care and answer those questions about looking at long-term care. making sure assets are funded, that nest eggs are protected from long-term care expenses. In our opinion, that is broader than legal documents, but having those essential legal documents in place, power of attorneys, medical directives, wills, trust, and also HIPAA authorizations so that someone can get information should something happen to you. I think I'm in my time, Taylor. I hope so. I tried hard.
Nope, you did well, Melanie. Thank you so much. You did a great job. And now we will turn it over to Tina Thomas.
Tina, you are muted.
I'm going to go back to a couple of slides that Melanie went over and ask her to just explain this to you all, because I know that there are lots of questions centered around these two slides. I know she showed us the answers, but I know many of you are wondering, how did that happen? And can I have just a little bit more explanation about
Absolutely.
these two slides?
And I apologize on this side, trying to do the remote share. My slides were going a little crazy, so I apologize for that. I also quickly, if it's okay, Tina, I want to go back to talk about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid as it relates to this. I saw that flash up in the slide. And so when you think of Medicare, you want to think of, because when we get questions about Medicaid, we always get questions about Medicare first. Because it is something that most people are familiar with, Medicare. And Medicare, the purpose of Medicare, when you think of Medicare, you want to think of your health insurance, right? Anthem, Blue Cross, you want to think of that health insurance. The purpose of Medicare, when it pays for long-term care, because it doesn't cover long-term care, but the purpose of when it will cover those concerns is Medicare is trying to rehabilitate you. They're trying to get you back in a position to see if that care that they provide through Medicare is going to be longer, right? And so the care, is it going to be longer for that period? Are you going to get back in place to be able to do that? So someone comes out of the hospital, they go into a facility that's a rehabilitation facility. Medicare will pay for that, but typically only for about 100 days, right? At that point, Medicare will no longer pay. And since my team told me I'm in good time, I'll tell quickly my favorite story about that is I had a client, and I'll change the facts a little bit, who called us for long-term care planning. And her dad was 90 years old, and he was in a facility. And while he was in the facility, he actually had someone that, they said Medicare is no longer going to pay because he's doing great. He's already rehabilitated. Daughter's like, wait a second, when I go see my dad, he is wiped out. He's not doing well. Well, then we found out that dad actually had a very young, attractive 24-year-old nurse. And so when the nurse would go in the morning, dad would be shaking and moving and doing everything he could. By the time daughter got there in the evening, he was wiped out and couldn't do anything. So they were saying he could no longer be rehabilitated, but he was not in a position to do that, right? So Medicare does not have to pay for a whole 100 days. It only pays for that time to see if you can get rehabilitated. Medicaid, again, ends with the word aid. And so when we look at Medicaid, we have to worry about countable assets versus non-countable assets. So Medicaid basically 101 says everything you have counts against you. And most people have heard you only can have about $2,000 in your name to qualify for Medicaid, right? Only about $2,000. Most people have heard that. That's a little bit of a simplification, but that's what the black letter law says. And it says anything you have that can be turned into cash counts against that for Medicaid. So if you think about anything you have, so I love Tina's necklace, right? So Tina's necklace would count against her if she was going to turn for Medicaid. The reason is she can turn that necklace into cash just by selling it to me because I like it, right? So it counts against her. But then Medicaid has all of these rules that basically say that there are exceptions, things that don't count against us when it comes to our assets. So Medicaid says Tina can have her necklace, because assets, stuff in our house, tangibles, don't count against us. So if we look here at Bill and Mary have about $700,000, but a home, if you're living in it and you're married, don't count against us. Your home furnishings, it doesn't matter if you have $100,000 in furnishings or you only have, like rags and riches in your house. Home furnishings don't count against us. You can have a vehicle, your most expensive vehicle. So although it's a Mercedes-Benz, doesn't count against Bill and Mary here. They can have their savings for $20,000 because they are married, and we can shift that money to the married spouse. And then the funeral. Even the state of Virginia says that you can have a funeral. They don't want to bury you, so they have that as well. And then as we look at their income, here, wife is qualifying for Medicaid. Husband has the $5,000, and so income does not count. And we use this as a simplification to show that wife qualifies for Medicaid to impress upon people why it's so important to get help to look at Medicaid planning. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people that contact us and they've already given away money, right? Medicaid counts gifts against you. They've already moved assets or bought things and tried to pre-plan on their own, and they won't qualify. Well, if we had spoken with them, they would have qualified. So thank you for having us go back to that, Tina.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. So for those of you who have questions for Melanie, you can either put your questions in the chat box or just hang on and we'll be able to get to those questions near the end. And before I get started, I would like to pose a poll to some of you to find out where our caregivers, where our attendees are coming from. So you'll look on your screen and there will be a series of questions there. Just go ahead and select the one that's most applies to you. Oh, wow, lots of movement. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So we see that there are lots of non-paid caregivers, professional caregivers. And for those of you who selected other, in the chat box, type down, what does that mean? Are you a law enforcement officer? What does that mean by other? I'm going to launch another poll. I'd like to find out, how did you find out about this event? And again, if you select other, type in the chat box at the bottom of the screen what that other means. I'm happy that so many people found out by going to, it looks like alz.org. I'm going to share those results with you so that we can see how folks found out about this program. Great. And then there's one last poll I'd like to ask you. I want to find out, is this your first time attending the conference that's hosted by the Greater Richmond chapter? Yeah, we're gonna end the polling now and share those results. So there are lots of new people who are attending this session today. Welcome. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate that very much. So now we're going to take a look at my presentation. Melanie did such a great job teeing it up for me, talking about building your team, your network, your support systems in place for your caregiving and care support needs. Let me see if I can advance those slides.
I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway and more, much more than this. I did it my way.
I love Old Blue Eyes very, very much. And many people want to things their way, and they want them when they want them. And the only way that you can truly get what you want when you want it is you've got to make your wishes known. People have to know what it is that you truly want. And there are 3 simple steps that we want to take to make sure people know what our wishes are. We want to have a conversation. Decisions need to be made, and then we need to take action. Now here, the 5 wishes is one example of a tool that can be used to help families and friends have this very important conversation. The 5 wishes is an easy document written to help adults, regardless of age or health, to consider documents and conversations centered around care needs now and for those nearing the end of life. Very important conversations, difficult conversations, but necessary conversations. The other thing that's very important for folks to talk about is the DNR. Do not resuscitate order. What it is, when do I want it? And here in Virginia, they have the POST form, which stands for Physicians Orders for Scope of Treatment. This is different from the DNR because this really tells your doctors and providers and your family how you want treatment. So it's not just that I don't want to be on artificial life support, but I want to have antibiotics, or I want a certain type of treatment at this stage in the process. So it's more specific, and those are available, and any elder law attorney can talk to you about these processes as well. These are very, very important documents. And then there are documents that providers can use. Sometimes we have to nudge, support, and encourage conversations with our doctors and our providers. And providers can use what's called the SHARE approach. The SHARE approach is 5 simple steps, SHARE. Number 1, seek out the patient's participation, getting the patient, the person who needs care, involved in the conversation. When I was working in long-term care communities and working in home care, I would never allow the provider to come into the room and say, Mrs. Jones, how is your dad today? And the dad would be sitting right there. I would encourage the provider to allow this person to be involved in the conversation. So we want to get the patient's participation. Number 2, help the patient explore and compare treatment options. Talk to them about what is available and let people make decisions about what it is that they want. Then we want to assess the patient's values and preferences. What's important to this person? Number 4, reach a decision with the patient, come up with an agreement about what's going to be done. And then all important, and I heard Melanie talk about this, evaluate the decisions over time. So you have a plan, then you have to go back periodically and reevaluate the plan because our health needs have changed. Maybe decision makers or co-decision makers, maybe their status or situation have changed. So you have to go back and evaluate those decisions from time to time. Now, an interdisciplinary approach is very important. An interdisciplinary approach involves team members from different disciplines working together with a common purpose. They set goals, they make decisions, and then they share in the roles, resources, and responsibilities for supporting the person at the center of the conversation. It's an interdisciplinary approach, many people coming together to offer support. Now, caregiving can be very draining and isolating. And I know there are so many caregivers on the call today that I'm preaching to the choir when I say that. It can be very draining and isolating. So there are a couple things that are very, very crucial. One, that we know our role as a caregiver, know our expertise. What am I good at? What can I do? And then also know what your limitations are. Those things, I just can't do those things. And then as you start to put your team together, know the role of your team and your team members. What can my team do? What is my team good at? Very important. Now, there are many different types of teams. The team is determined by the needs and the desires of the person needing care or needing assistance. The people that I need on my team might look very different from the folks that you need on your team, because it's very dependent upon the things that are very important to me. Those psychosocial things that I need, the things that are very important in my life, in my sphere, my circle, those are the elements that I truly want to bring to the team. And here in 2018, the Alzheimer's Association put together the Dementia Care Best Practice Recommendations. And you can see right in the center of everything is the person-centered focus. What's the focus for the person that we're bringing support for? And we need multiple people coming together to provide support with a focus centered on what is it that this person wants? What is it that this person needs? What can this person still do? You heard Melanie talking about that, keeping things center focused, making sure we're supporting the person in terms of what they can still do, enhancing the best quality of life for the person as a whole, taking a look at the holistic view of the person. Not just looking at the losses, but the things that remain. There are always losses, but there are also things that remain. There are things that the person who has a cognitive impairment can still do. There are still opportunities for enjoyment, for pleasure, for exploration. So we want to seek out those opportunities so that the person who has a cognitive impairment is living their absolute best life despite the disease. There are limitations, absolutely. We acknowledge those limitations and we make adaptations for those. In particular, when a person is living with dementia, it's a progressive disorder. So the person's, their cognitive capabilities are changing. Oftentimes there's a significant decline that happens over time. And when that happens, you want to be making adjustments and changes to your circle, your sphere, and your support, keeping always the person-centered focus in mind. Now, as you start to think about your team, there are some essential folks who need to be a part of your team. Your healthcare provider absolutely needs to be a part of the team. I have heard from folks that oftentimes they met with their healthcare provider, and after their loved one received a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, the provider said, you don't need to come back. Or you can come back in a year, or I'll see you, 6 months from now. You want a provider who is engaged in the process, all throughout the journey of the disease process. So you want a provider that you have a relationship with and that understands what your needs are. Having a nurse that's involved in the process, very important. And then a healthcare navigator. Now, at the Alzheimer's Association, we call them care consultants, care coordinators, people who can help walk you through this process. A person who clearly understands the disease, and they are 2 or 3 steps ahead of you, helping to offer coaching and support all throughout the journey, a navigator. A pharmacist is an underutilized gem in our communities. Pharmacists can take a look at your medications, they can help with reconciliations, they can tell you where there are negative interactions going on. Very important to work with your pharmacist And also let the pharmacist know if you're taking supplements and other over-the-counter medications. The good thing about working with your local pharmacist is they can do a consultation with you and it doesn't cost you any money. You just come in with your list, you talk to your pharmacist, and I think that you will find it very, very, very beneficial. It is truly an underutilized resource in the community. And then your dentist. The dentist is so important because the dentist can take a look at the oral health of an individual, especially those who have cognitive issues. Some of the different diseases and things that happen in the mouth, different bacteria that happen in the mouth can get into the bloodstream and cause increased cognitive decline. So very important that we're working with the dentist. It is tricky and kind of, sometimes limited resources in finding a dentist who will support someone with a cognitive impairment, but it is worth the effort. You can reach out to the Alzheimer's Association to see if we can help you identify a dentist in your area that supports persons who are impacted by Alzheimer's disease or other cognitive impairments, or simply dial 211 from your local area. You'll get someone on the phone and ask them to help you identify a dentist who supports persons with a cognitive impairment. And lastly, on the essential side, we need legal representation. As early as possible, we want to make sure we're talking with our legal representatives to make sure that we are getting all of our documents and our paperwork lined up in order sooner rather than later, because as the disease progresses, the person may not be able to sign off on legal documents once the disease has advanced to a certain place. So very important that we have legal representation as well. Now, for the supportive part of the team, we need a person that I call a distractor in our lives. And you say, a distractor? What is that? A distractor, a friend who comes over and says, let's go out for coffee, let's go shopping, some retail therapy, someone to take your mind off of the day-to-day caregiving duties, someone to go and shoot a few rounds with, play tennis, go swimming with. We need someone in our space that we deem is a distractor, because that will help maintain a sense of sanity for the caregivers. Oftentimes, outsiders, when they see this happening, they may think, does she care about what's happening to mother? Is he not concerned? This may be a therapeutic way that this person is just kind of disengaging just for enough time to take a breather and regroup. A distractor. We all need a listener, someone who will listen empathetically and with a non-judgmental ear, a listener. And then we've got to have a cheerleader, someone who's rooting you on, cheering you on, reminding you that you can do it, because caregiving is tough. And to Melanie's point, we don't get a playbook. There is no manual. And oftentimes we went from one day being very independent, never needing to support anyone, and the very next day, you're a caregiver for someone. So we need a cheerleader. You need someone on your team who is a realist. They just keep it real, no matter what's going on. You've got to have one of those in your corner. And then you need an optimist. I need someone who can see the bright side of it when I'm feeling down and I can't do it. I've got to have an optimist on my team. And then lastly, you need a fibber on your team. I need someone on my team who will say, you're looking good, girl, even though it's my worst day. I need a fibber on the team who will help me along the journey from time to time. I don't always need to hear the brutal truth. And when you're starting to build your team, here's some things to consider. Often caregivers start out in a one-to-one fashion. One person providing all the care, doing everything. The quickest way to burnout is to maintain a one-to-one process as a caregiver. You heard Melanie give us some startling statistics about the rate in which caregivers are going down. Another approach is one-to-many. One person giving a direction to many people, telling many people what to do at the same time. But one person is really the driver in terms of everything that's happening. The best approach is a many-to-many approach. And that looks like you as the caregiver, maybe you're working with your son and maybe one person at your church. And your son is connecting with neighbors or friends and family members. And your church member is connecting with the people in the church and the women's club and other organizations on your behalf, so that you're not having to do all of that legwork and all of that coordinating. When you put those pieces together and you start to direct care, here's what it starts to look like. Now, here's an example of Tina's care team. I walk into planning my team looking at what is it that I may need. I need a break sometimes. There are times I need to vent. And you have to have people in your corner that you can vent to. Everyone needs a person like that in their life. I call them your go-to person. Your go-to person is the person you can call anytime, day or night, say anything you need to say to them, and they talk you down, and tomorrow they respect you and they never judge you for anything that you said before. And then you need people who can perform tasks for you. Who can give me a break? Who can I call when I need encouragement? I need a break. Maybe my son has coordinated with several of my neighbors, and I've got a schedule, and my neighbor says, I'm available, Tina, on Tuesdays in the evening. As a caregiver, this is so helpful, because if I'm having a difficult day on Monday, I know I'm going to get a little bit of reprieval coming on Tuesday evenings. Joe is available on Wednesdays from 4 to 6. And you can schedule these folks way ahead of time so that you know that you have some intermittent support. If I have my women's club group, they've identified 2 or 3 people who might be available. It may be only once a month. I'm available, Janice says, the first Monday of every month. Let me know what you need. I'm there. Set a time up ahead of time. Janice is there so that you can go and do something else. The same thing for people you need to vent to. Identify them ahead of time. So you want to be thinking about what you need before you need it as you're putting your team together. Which friend can I call? Which friend can I call for a certain type of situation? Knowing ahead of time will be very, very helpful when you feel completely overwhelmed in your caregiving duties. Who at my church can I call? Or my social club, or the synagogue can I call, or the mosque, when I need just a little bit of encouragement from time to time. So you want to truly think through what those needs are and who you can reach out to ahead of time. And by doing so, you begin to delegate some of those responsibilities to let someone else go to the market for you. When the neighbor goes to the market, they pick up your list and they can go for you as well. Being in the virtual platform now with social distancing, we've really learned how to do these things. We're doing things very differently. We're calling in our groceries and somebody else is getting them off the shelf for us and putting them in our car. So we have learned that other people can do some of the tasks that we were very comfortable with before, and some of the things that we were not willing to relinquish to others. Someone else could go to the market for us. Who can come over and sit with my loved one for me for a while so I can get a little bit of respite? Allowing someone to come over and do the laundry. Someone else to pick up the pharmacy for you. Someone to come and walk the dog. Is there someone who is willing to come and cut the grass? Often people will say, what can I do to help? You want to create a list ahead of time of things people can do to help so you have something to offer to them. People want to help, they don't know how. We have to provide them with that information. Your care coordinator and navigators can help you set some of this up way ahead of time. In the very beginning of the process, you want to be thinking about these things that will come up down the line. When you start to relinquish some of these things, there's time for you. being able to take care of yourself. Creating a calendar is very, very important. Building your care team will help to preserve you as a caregiver. Healthy mind, body, and spirit. In order to maintain a healthy mind, there are a couple of things that we need. Healthy mind says we have the ability to think, explore, and grow. We maintain a sense of function, very important as a caregiver. Maintain a sense of social connectiveness. I have heard from caregivers that sometimes they feel guilty for wanting to stay socially connected. Even in a socially distant world, we can stay socially connected. We're doing that right now. This is very important. Maintain a sense of purpose, something to get up for every day, something to do, in addition to the caregiving duties. In addition to that, a sense of purpose. And then number 5, so important, maintaining a sense of self. I have heard so many people say, I am a caregiver. But you're much more than just a caregiver. You want to maintain a sense of self, because when we lose a sense of purpose, a sense of connectedness, and a sense of self, we become bitter and angry and disgruntled about the caregiving that we are providing for our loved ones. Very important. Caregiving plays a significant role on our bodies. It does impact both our emotions, our mind, our body, and our behaviors. There are people who are stressed out, but they don't know they're stressed out. But if you ask people around them, they know they're stressed out because they're exhibiting all these different behaviors that you see on the screen. Now, here are my 4 A's for maintaining a healthy mind when caregiving. Number 1, acceptance. Accept that this is happening. This is big. It's very difficult for some to accept that this is happening to us. It's happening in my house, and it sucks, but it is happening. Acceptance is very important. Number 2, take action. Call your lawyer, call your doctor, call your friend, call a therapist. Do something. Oftentimes people see these warning signs, there are red flags going on, and they do nothing. We can't get it stuck in a place of complacency. We have to begin to take action. Number 3, acknowledge what you can do and what you cannot do. I am very A-type personality. I'm very goal-oriented, and I'm a caregiver at heart. I'm an excellent caregiver for anyone else except probably my spouse or my partner. And because we know that about me, I acknowledge that about myself. We have had several conversations centered around caregiving. That if my husband developed a condition where we had to bring care into the home, the decision had already been made. I would not try to, be heroic and take care of him. It is in everyone's best interest for us to bring care into the home. It would not be a good experience for anyone because I'm way too picky and too particular. It would be difficult for my husband, and I would be very frustrated and stressed out. I acknowledge that. So as a caregiver, acknowledge what you can and what you cannot do. Not everyone is built to be a caregiver. Some people are built to manage other things, maybe not caregiving, and the best thing for everyone is to bring care into the home. Or make a realization that care needs to happen outside of the home. And then this is so hard for so many people. Allow people to help. Accepting help is so difficult. When someone is offering you a gift, you don't have to do anything except accept the gift. It doesn't mean I'm less than. It just means I'm accepting help into the home. So here's a little bit of recap. The help provided by others can minimize stress and feelings of being overwhelmed. Developing your own network of helpers and supporters may help you lead to a more productive, active, and engaged life as a caregiver. Getting people to help you with certain tasks works better with a well thought out plan rather than trying to find help when there's an emergency. When you have a plan and you've already identified who can do what, you know who you can call and when. It often is very stressful when you're trying to find someone at the last minute. Now, when you put your plan together, you can identify folks who will say to you, I'm available when there's an emergency. So have a short list of those type of folks as well. And then lastly, this plan will provide you and the people who are supporting and assisting you with confidence and the assistance that you need to be there when you need it. If we're going to be like Blue Eyes and have it our way, when we want it, how we want it, we have to have a plan. Now I turn it over to my colleague, Annette.
Thank you so much. Hopefully all of you are already beginning to develop your plan of action going forward and are taking good notes about what you need to do the minute we finish our session today. So I'd like to get started with just a Wordle. Who in the world doesn't love a Wordle? And so we're going to talk just a little bit about caregiving and caregivers. There we go, Tina. There it is. So when you're looking at this Wordle, well, went too far. When you're looking at the Wordle, what comes to mind when you're thinking about caregiving? I'd like for you to just take a minute and drop in the chat box 3 things that describe yourself as a caregiver. What are 3 things that come to mind to you as you go about your day, your week of caregiving? Some of the words that kind of pop out to me are, maybe frustration, maybe anger, maybe that's stress, maybe it's helplessness, or maybe it's increased pain. But not every caregiver feels that way. I always want to look, and our team call me the optimist. I'm always trying to find the brightness in everything. And many caregivers feel that being the caregivers that they are is truly an honor. It's a pleasure for them to do that. And we would never want to think that everyone considers caregiving a burden, because it's not. But there are times throughout those days, those weeks, those times when you realize or feel that you are all alone. And you're not, but it does sometimes feel that way. So just take a minute, pop it in the chat. What are your 3 thoughts about how you feel on a regular basis about caregiving? As we heard Maria talk about at the very, very beginning, that there are over 5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease currently, and we know that's only going to increase. With those 5 million Americans, we realize that there are 16 million American caregivers. And those caregivers are providing unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. And this is a staggering statistic. These caregivers provided an estimate of 18.6 billion, with a B, hours of care. And that's valued at nearly $244 billion. So the work that you do is amazing. It's invaluable what you are providing when you are providing support for your loved one. And your dedication is truly acknowledged. But what I have seen in my 35, 36 years of providing support to caregivers, as I mentioned, I've been with the association for 16 years, but prior to that, I worked in an adult day setting for 19 years. So my entire career as a gerontologist has been working with caregivers. So I can speak with truth when I tell you that many caregivers often become so consumed with providing care and being with their loved one on this journey of living with Alzheimer's disease, that they often forget that they also have a journey in life. And they forget that while they're taking their loved one to every doctor's appointment, every dentist appointment, everything that needs to be done for their loved one, they often do not go get their annual exams. They do not make it to the dentist to get their own cleaning. They do not go for their wellness check. So I am imploring you to just please consider that as we move forward. And if you're making a list of things to do at the end of today's session, put this on the list. Make sure you're scheduling that time for yourself. Make those doctor's appointments today if you need to. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about the 10 signs of caregiver stress. And many of you are probably already going, yep, I know these, I know them by heart, I don't even need to hear them. But many caregivers are in denial. They're in denial about the stress that they're under. They're in denial maybe even about the disease and how it's progressing with their loved one. They may be in denial about the future and what the future may look like for their loved one and for themselves, maybe even financially. As Melanie mentioned, that's a huge issue for families. And many individuals will think, well, I'll just wait for Medicare to step up to the plate, or I'll just wait for Medicaid to take over. Well, that's not always the case. And so what is that plan B? Don't be in denial. Call that elder law attorney, as we've all said, sooner rather than later. And when you're thinking about these 10 signs of caregiver stress, go back to what Tina just told us about developing that team and who can help us as we cope with each of these signs. The next one that often pops up is anger. Anger for individuals. You know, it might be anger about, as Tina said, you know, this really stinks. She used a different word, but this really stinks. And this is not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for my retirement to look this way, or for those caregivers who may be providing care for a parent. And maybe that caregiver has suddenly had to leave their dream job. They've given up their financial security in order to provide care for mom or dad or someone else. And so anger about it can be that thing that just puts its negative head right in there and then just surfaces to the top with a rage that you just can't imagine. All of these emotions that we're going to talk about today, the anger, the sadness, all of those things are very, very common. It's what you do with that emotion that makes it whether it's acceptable or unacceptable. If you get angry and then suddenly push your loved one down into a chair because you just can't stand answering the question one more time, then that's more of a kind of a stress or an anger that we would need to have a conversation and make sure that we provide support for. The next one is social withdrawal. And this is a huge issue for caregivers. Social withdrawal from family, from friends, from those women's clubs that Tina talked about. You know, it's very easy to not to go to church because I can't take mom to church with me because she might say something that's inappropriate or she doesn't understand the sermon anymore. So I can't take her. So I'm just not going to go to church myself. And then what happens is we see families and caregivers almost become prisoners in their own home. We've seen caregivers, or I've worked with caregivers on a regular basis who not left their home for 6 months. And that's prior to COVID-19 pandemic. I'm talking about, well, I can't go to the grocery store to take my husband with me, so I'll just have my daughter pick up all of my grocery needs. And then they never make time to leave themselves. Social withdrawal is a huge factor. The next one is anxiety. Gosh, this can take on many different appearances, whether it's laying in bed every morning. And these are stories that I've certainly heard from caregivers. I lay in bed every morning, Annette, until my mom wakes up. And she said, I can tell within the next 5 minutes after she's awaken for the day, whether I'm going to have a good day or a bad day, just by the way that mom enters into her day. And it's anxiety about that. It's anxiety about what the future may bring. What if your spouse is the person that has been diagnosed and you are their caregiver, but gosh, you rely on them for so many things, or used to, and whether that's financially you relied on that person or emotionally, it's a huge issue. The next one, depression. Depression is a factor that many caregivers will acknowledge. Depression that affects your ability to cope with the situation that you're dealing with. Many caregivers, and as a gerontologist, I will tell you, if you are an older adult that is providing care for someone, you don't even acknowledge that there's an issue with depression. Yes, I am chronically sad. I have been sad for months at this point. And, you know, that depression may not be acknowledged verbally, but you may start to have symptoms. You may have pain that you never had before, or you may have other issues. And it could be the underlying depression that you're just not expressing. Exhaustion. Goodness, I have not seen what you put in the chat yet. I'm interested to see that. But many caregivers that I work with are so exhausted. They feel like they sleep with one eye open because they're concerned that their loved one might awaken during the middle of the night and get up and fall, maybe on their way to the restroom, or they might get up in the middle of the night and become so incredibly confused, or go to the kitchen and try to make a pot of tea and set the house on fire. So the caregiver, even while they're in bed, may be awake and not getting that restful, that restorative sleep that we know that we need. So exhaustion, huge. Falls right into that sleeplessness. Many caregivers tell me that they have not slept through the night in years. You know, we know that a caregiver can provide care for anywhere from 4 to 8 years, but we know caregivers sometimes are on caregiver duty for 20 years. We know that sleeplessness or lack of sleep can be detrimental to your own health. And so how do we incorporate those things that Tina was talking about to get that team together to make sure that you get that sleep at night? How do we do that? Do we hire someone to come into the home? Potentially so. Irritability. Wow. I don't know if any of you are feeling that way, but the stress level and the irritability and the anxiety levels have increased for probably almost everyone, considering COVID-19. But then you layer on the fact of being that caregiver. So imagine, if you will, if you're not a caregiver on this call, imagine if you are in your home 24/7 with that person that you, maybe you're a professional caregiver that's on this call, and you are now living with that person that you worked for. That could make you a little more irritable. How do we manage that? That sometimes leads to moodiness and triggers negative responses. And again, very, very normal. But how do we give you things to put in your toolkit to help you reduce your opportunities of irritability? What do we give you to help you have more effective communication, or to understand that dementia behavior that you're dealing with? The next one, lack of concentration. I work with many caregivers who will say to me, Annette, I think I have called Alzheimer's disease. I cannot stay focused. I cannot remember what I need to do on a daily basis. And I assure them that it's often related back to whether it's the depression or the anxiety, but the lack of concentration. If you are so focused in on someone else's needs that you can't really think about what your needs are going to be, how can you expect your brain to help you to develop that plan of action or to remember what you need to do? And this next one is a big one. Health problems. Health problems that begin to take a toll on your physical and your mental health. I already said that many caregivers can provide care from 4 to 8 years up to 20 years. And during those 20 years, often the cumulative issues with stress rear their ugly heads. And so everybody can think of this saying, I'm going to say it right now and you're going to finish it. If you don't manage stress, stress will manage you. And what we often see are those issues. Someone just popped in, said something about blood pressure has increased since they've become a caregiver. Very, very common. Those autoimmune diseases that are often brought on by chronic stress. Stress that's left untreated. Many of those things, maybe you never had headaches, but now you have headaches on a regular basis, or maybe you never had that GI problem that has now been diagnosed. All of these things can lead and lead back around to that increased mortality rate that Melanie mentioned. And I want you to just hear that stat one more time, 63% higher for caregivers. And I work with many caregivers who do predecease the person that they are providing care for. So that's why managing these stress and understanding the importance of even acknowledging these stress signs. I worked with a caregiver one time and she said, she showed up at my office and she said, Annette, I really don't need you to do anything for me. I just need you to find respite for my mom while I have a little procedure. And I said, that's fine. We understand the importance of respite and the association is a huge supporter of getting respite. I said, but let me talk about these signs of caregiver stress. And I just want you to think about them as I go through each one, and then just put a little tick mark by what you think is important to you, what you can acknowledge. And after I went through each of these 10 signs of stress, she had tears running down her face. And she said, Annette, I have every single one of those. And then she went on to tell me the story that she needed to go get some medical care herself because her blood pressure was literally at stroke level prior to coming to visit me that day. So I tell you that story not to frighten you, not to make you think that caregiving is going to kill you. What I do is tell you that story to empower you with to say, these are the signs. If you are dealing with them, then let's get some support. So I wanted to go through that caregiver stress list. And many of you may have seen this, but I want you to take that pen that you've got beside you, and I want you to give a tick mark by yes, if you're experiencing some of these signs on a regular basis, or no, if this is not an issue for you. The first one, do you feel like you have to do it all by yourself and that you should be doing more? Let me let you think about that for a second. Is that you? Do you never, ever get enough done? Do you fall in bed at midnight after making sure your loved ones' every care needs are met and that they've gotten 3 nutritious meals for the day? They've also gotten snacks. They've got every med that they've needed. And then it's midnight and you realize that you have neglected to eat dinner. So all you have the energy to make for yourself is peanut butter crackers. And gosh, did I really take my medicine for my blood pressure this morning? I can't remember if I did or not. So I'm not going to take it today. I'll just worry about that tomorrow. Is that you? If so, check yes. The next one. Do you experience withdrawal from your family, from your friends, from activities that you used to enjoy on a regular basis? Were you someone who loved a good Sunday hike? But now that you're a caregiver, finding time or finding someone to come stay with your loved one while you take that afternoon hike just isn't a possibility. It takes too much energy to put that plan together. Is that you? Mark yes, if so. Do you worry about the safety of the person that you care for on a regular basis? Do you go to bed every night worrying that your loved one might have an issue during the night or Or do you wake up the next morning and think, is this the day that we're going to have to seek placement for mom because I can't do it anymore? Do you worry about the safety? Do you think, gosh, I can't be beside her all the time. What if she falls? Mark a yes if that's you. Do you feel anxious about money, about healthcare related decisions? And Melanie spent a lot of time educating us on what we need to do, but sometimes we don't have those things in place. I'll give you an example of a caregiver who had no plan in place. And as her husband was at the adult day with me, she was calling me as the EMS folks were wheeling her out of the house as she was having a heart attack. And she was calling me to tell me what she thought needed to happen. Next, do you deny the impact of the disease and its effects on your family? Is that a yes? Is that a no? Do you often feel grief or sadness that your relationship with the person isn't what it used to be? Your loved one, now that you're a caregiver, may not seem that they're that spouse or that soulmate that you used to have, and you're grieving that loss. And people tell us all the time that this is a disease that they lose a little bit of their loved one on a regular basis. Do you often feel frustrated or angry when the person continuously repeats the same things over and over again, or they don't seem to listen when you ask them to do something that you feel like they know what they should be doing? Is that you? And then finally, do you experience health problems that are taking a physical or mental toll on yourself? So look at your piece of paper there. Look at your tick marks. If you answered yes to any of the questions, you may be experiencing more caregiver stress than you were even acknowledging. I think the first part is identifying the stress, that it is important to identify it, and then figure out how you're going to get to Tina's and to Melanie's next stage of managing that, whether it's looking at putting plans in place to get a team developed, or whether it's getting those legal and financial things in place. So as I wrap up today, I just want you to be reminded at the end of the day, if you are so overwhelmed at taking care of someone else that you've neglected your own physical and mental health, you're at risk, and you need our support. You need the support of all those people on your care team. And as I do the big pitch to Lori, who's going to take us into the home stretch and talk to us about some things that you really can put in your toolkit to help you, I just want to remind you that self-care is never, ever selfish. So hopefully that's been helpful. And Lori, help us. What do we do now?
Thank you so much for great information, Annette. We've been talking about stress a lot today. We all have it at some level in our lives. We feel it at different times in our lives. Caregivers, we know, can have a higher degree of stress during their caregiving journey. And now that you've covered the signs of stress in your presentation, Annette, hopefully we'll all have a little bit better understanding of where we're at in our own personal stress level. Just being able to acknowledge it, to think about it, and then take some action. I have a quote I want to share with you. Oh, let me go back a minute. Getting ahead of me. Hold on a second. Okay. This quote about stress can reframe how we look and react to it. Perhaps we have more control than we realize. So I'm going to go ahead and say the quote. Stress is not what happens to us, it's our response to what happens. And our response is something we can choose. Certainly a different way of looking at stress and thinking about What can we do about it? So I've got the following stress busters that I want to share with you that will hopefully help us choose the response that we want related to stress. We know that we are better caregivers when we take care of ourselves, and we are all worth it. Say yes when someone offers to help. This is hard to do sometimes. We've talked about this throughout the session. Some people don't want to be a bother. Other people feel like, I should be able to handle this. I can handle whatever's in front of me. We know really that it's impossible for any one of us to do it all. And the saying, it takes a village, really does apply to caregiving. You will allow someone else to be a blessing. Some people are just waiting for you to say yes in some way. Try a journal for self-expression. Really, any notebook or binder will do in this situation. Even if you just have a few minutes during the day, self-expression on paper gives us the opportunity to identify what we might be feeling and an avenue to express those feelings. This can certainly possibly reduce our level of stress on a daily basis if we're intentional about the journaling. And many people report they actually feel better and more balanced when they do this type of journaling on a regular basis. Reach out to socialize with family or friends. It could be a phone call, or in this day and age with COVID, it could be a Zoom in today's world. This is certainly something we have to be intentional about. It's really easy to let the day go by and we haven't reached out to anybody. We haven't connected with anybody. It could be maybe asking a friend, hey, can you just give me a call at the same time each day? Just give me a quick call. We can touch base for a minute. That may be something that you could ask a friend to do. You might also let your family know that a really important way that they can support you would be perhaps to get a regular email. Just a touch base email, letting you know how things are and letting them know that they support you. Our mental health will really thank us for doing this. Exercise. Do what you enjoy doing. Every movement helps, so even if during the course of a day you have 15 minutes or so, put on some music and start moving. By making our physical health a priority, we're really focusing on our needs too. So often the focus really is that loved one, as it should be, but focusing on our needs are very important, and not only will it help our heart, but it'll certainly help our mood if we get up and do something during the day exercise-wise. Sleep. We talked about this today. Exhaustion makes everything harder. It really, really does. So perhaps it's a matter of giving ourselves permission to take a cat nap during the day if you can, or maybe trying to go to bed a little bit earlier on a couple of nights. It's amazing what some extra rest can do for our stress level. Share a hug with a loved one. We all need hugs. In this COVID world, it may be difficult to get a hug, but we can certainly do expressions of love so that people know that they are loved. We all need to have those feelings. Bath time, relaxing, soothing, calming. And I know what you're thinking, when do I have time to do that? Well, this may be when you say yes to that neighbor or that family member to come visit your loved one and you treat yourself to a nice, calm, soothing bath. Unplug from the media regularly. We can certainly get saturated with information and not even realize how much it affects our mood and stress level. Choosing positive messaging will help us feel less stressed. This is certainly something we want to keep an eye on because we can control how much information we expose ourselves to. Seek out support and resources. Most people really do want to be helpful in some way. Reaching out is truly a sign of strength, and certainly the Alzheimer's Association is here to help. Other resources for support have been identified today, but I would reiterate church family, neighbors, local organizations, and support groups. And certainly the Alzheimer's Association offers a variety of support groups that are happening right now. They're meeting on a regular basis in a virtual platform. You really are not alone, and we're here to help you with that. Take a break, come back stronger. So what does that look like? Maybe it's an afternoon to yourself. Maybe it's an overnight with help with your support team. Regular breaks can do wonders. We come back stronger, less stressed, and ready to continue our caregiving role with hopefully more energy. Eat healthy and nutritious foods. Think about ways to incorporate healthier foods. Maybe a dietitian can help you identify some areas to grow in this way. Small changes can add up to all of us feeling better. Make sure you eat regularly. That's important as well. To Annette's point, it could be later in the day and we realize we haven't done that for ourselves. The right food choices we choose can give us the energy we need to do what we do every day for our loved ones. Relax with moments of stretching and meditation. So maybe some of you are already doing meditation. It's really a habitual process where you're training your mind to focus and redirect your thoughts. Some benefits can include maybe a more positive mood. Maybe my outlook's a little better when I do some meditating. Maybe my sleep patterns are healthier. Maybe I have a little less stress and a little less anxiety, and I actually might improve my self-image if I'm taking that time throughout the day to do some meditating. Consider learning more about the technique if you haven't tried it, and add it to your daily routine whenever it fits into your schedule. It can be done throughout the day, and again, this is something you're doing just for you, which is so important when we talk about caregiver stress. Lastly, say no when you can or you need to. Sometimes no is the best answer. A lot of times former obligations sometimes need to be adjusted in this season of your life. Give yourself permission to say no for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. That was great. I also want to say thank you to Annette, Tina, and Melanie. That was such a wealth of information and has given us all things to reflect on and consider. We will now welcome questions with Jess and Rachel.
I just froze up there for a second, Taylor. I think you said me. We do have a lot of questions. Melanie, I think there are a lot for you. Can you talk about the rising costs of long-term care rates if you have long-term care insurance? Folks are asking questions about the rules for unmarried couples, for singles. And another question about, I know I'm throwing a lot at you. If you've got the power of attorney for your loved one, there's no advance directive in place, but the loved one doesn't understand the language of the questions that are being asked in the advance directive, what is the POA to do?
Great. I'll start, Rachel. First, thank you all for the questions. And I do have to stop to say how wonderful the other presentations were. Every time I get a chance to hear the presenters at Alzheimer's, I am encouraged by the resources that are available. I'll start with the first question. I think the person who asked that was talking about companies when it looks at the cost of the rising cost of long-term care insurance. And I will share, I do have to share for the record that I am licensed as an insurance agent and advisor, but I do not sell product. I do not sell long-term care insurance. We refer to great professionals who can help with that. But for caregivers, mostly that will be a question for the person themselves, because if someone already has a diagnosis, they're not going to qualify for long-term care insurance. It is insurance, and so you do have to qualify to receive that. And just know that legally, all companies have the right to raise their rates. They have the right to do that. And there's a lot of talk in the insurance world that really eventually those products will no longer be available, or they will change so much. There are a lot of hybrid products out there. So people always, you don't have to tell me in the chat, you don't have to send me things. I'm familiar with all of them. I just think for the purpose of looking at caregiving, if someone already has a diagnosis, please know that they're not going to qualify for an insurance product. But it's always the best time to look into that for yourself as a caregiver is now. How would you pay for long-term care? Long-term care insurance would be a great thing to have in your toolbox. Even if it's some type of coverage that allows that, whether it's a group policy or something as well, but all companies have the right to do that. I think the next question you told me, Rachel, or the next question you mentioned deals with long-term care and married versus single individuals. And absolutely, the person who asked that is dead on. There are different rules to qualify for long-term care Medicaid. And there are many different Medicaid programs that's beyond the scope of our work today. But in qualifying, one of the first things that we have to identify, even before we get to assets, when I talked about those categorical requirements, we look at whether or not a person is married or single. And there are different strategies. I want to note that there are many strategies available to single individuals. A spin down, and I always say spin down is kind of barbershop talk. In my world, I call it a qualification period, right? Because you get disqualified when you make gifts and spin down. But there are many different strategies, and there are some available to single individuals. And so I want to note here and bring out something when we talked about that one of the other speakers noted, I believe in Tina's presentation, she talked about the best time to plan is currently, when people are able to do that. So that's going to be important on someone being single and versus married. And we see that with couples a lot as well. So there are different rules and different strategies available if someone is single. One of the main reasons is because married couples, when we talk about gifts and how Medicaid looks at gifting, married couples can transfer gifts to one another with no penalty. And so that's a great strategy for elder law attorneys like myself. And I believe the last question dealt with power of attorneys. I love the way the person wrote that question in the chat. I'm going to do my best to try to phrase that because there are a couple of great nuggets in the way they wrote that question. When they asked if a person has a power of attorney but no advanced medical directive, but the person now cannot understand the medical directive. And I love the way they asked that question. Again, it brings back to Tina's point about looking at that, is that you want to do this work when people are competent and cognitive to do this. And I also always note, this is really a competency question, right? So is the person able to sign a medical document? Are they able to sign an advanced medical directive? And know that the legal standard to complete documents is the issue, not their ability to understand every single question in the advanced medical directive, every single question in a DNR, which is actually a medical, do not resuscitate, which is a medical document that doctors prepare, as Tina noted. They don't have to understand everything in there, but there's a legal competency standard. So comparatively, I can complete a power of attorney and I may not understand exactly, personally, I don't know to the penny what's in my bank account, right? But I have to know that what the document is I'm signing. I have to meet the legal standard to sign those documents, not understand every single question. So again, the best time to get information is now. Also know that a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or other related dementia does not mean that a person is completely incompetent to complete documents, right? The question is, do they have the legal standard to do that? And often physicians will help in noting whether or not someone just has the legal competency to understand the document. So you may not be able to get exactly everything that the person would have shared before they have been impacted by the disease or illness, but you can still maybe get those documents. If you're unable to, there is a court proceeding called a guardianship, and that often we hear that guardianship and conservatorship to get the ability to make decisions. But we really do use that as a last resort. But those were great questions.
Thanks, Melanie. The next question we have is for Tina. Tina, you had mentioned about finding a care coordinator or a navigator. Where would you suggest somebody go about finding this person?
Yeah, the best place to go is www.alz, Apple, Larry, Zebra, alz.org. And you're going to get one of our colleagues on the phone, and they're going to give you some guidance. We also have what's called the Community Resource Finder. It's the Alzheimer's Association Community Resource Finder. And there you can put in your zip code, and you can just search out at a query for you. What are you looking for? You answer those questions, and it will give you a list of what's available in your local area. If you're very overwhelmed and you say, I just don't know what to do, there are two easier options. You can dial 1-800-272-3900 and speak to someone on the phone, or pick up your phone and dial your local 211, and they can provide you some support, assistance, and some guidance.
Great, thank you. There's another question, Tina, that this is sort of the age-old question. My parents need help. My one parent will not allow help to come in to care for my other parent.
Mm-hmm.
He or she is doing everything on their own and or expecting the children to do everything without any paid help, even if it is affordable and in their ability to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very tricky. When one person, let's, for example, the wife does not want anybody to come into the house to care for her husband. And often the children they're watching that person's health decline as well. Really, trying to find someone who is that person views as an ally can be helpful, so that there's somebody in the room that they feel like that person is on their side to have this conversation. Who does this person trust? That can be helpful. Sometimes that person's doctor can be helpful with helping to bridge and have that conversation. But the saddest thing that could absolutely happen is if that person is competent, they are the decision maker. Sadly, they had to wait until that person went down before they were able to intervene. It's unfortunate, but sometimes that happens. Melanie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Tina. And we see that all the time. If the person is competent, they are the decision maker. And so that can be challenging. We have had clients I saw a couple folks in the chat on adult protective services. And as Tina said, when the person goes down, that does have interventions. And then we also, we do webinars in our office every month for caregivers, for their families, for people interested in estate planning. And we've done a webinar before called Critical Conversations. And Alzheimer's helped us and assisted us with the material for that. How do you have that conversation with mom? I piggyback on what Tina said. Don't think that's a conversation for the unweary. The dynamics in a family can shift very quickly. Now they'll see you as the child coming in, telling them what to do about their spouse, right? And you can't get the framing out of their mind that you are the child. So how do you do that? How do you have that conversation with mom, with dad?
And Jessica, we've got so many great questions in the chat. Let me just recommend that if you have a question, go ahead and put your question in the chat. We won't be able to answer all of them in this format, but we will answer all of them. And right after the session is over this afternoon, Rachel will send out a recording, and then we will respond to each one of those questions and just send the full list out to everyone. At this time, I'm going to ask Taylor and my colleague Kelly just to do a few announcements while you go ahead and put your questions in the chat.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Luke Shander, and I am a development staff member for the Greater Richmond chapter here at the Alzheimer's Association. And we, across our entire nation right now, are really excited to bring the Walk to End Alzheimer's to everyone in your own community, on your track, anywhere you are. So you may have seen commercials locally, or you may have seen anything on Facebook or in any other social media, but our walk is taking place this year. This is our largest nationwide fundraiser. It helps us to give the funds to do everything that we do at the association, our programs, our services, our advocacy, our important research, and everything we are doing locally in our communities for our families and our caregivers. So if you are interested in joining the walk, this year is a great time to do it because we will not be meeting in large groups as we normally would, but you can walk anywhere, and there is a walk everywhere. So if you go to alz.org/walk, it is free to join. You can find the walk near you. And here are a couple of our local walks on your screen. In 2 weeks' time, we have our Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck Region Walk on October 3rd. We have Fredericksburg on October 10th and our Richmond Walk on October 31st. And like I said, you don't have to be in those locations to get involved. And there's a few more walks listed there. We have some already take place. But we're going all the way through October, and we are still going to be raising funds for these walks through the end of the year. So through December 31st, and this year we know it's more important than ever. And lastly here, we have another slide. Our second fundraising event is called The Longest Day, and this is more of a do-it-yourself fundraiser. Do whatever you would like to do as a fundraiser to raise money and shine a light on Alzheimer's disease. We have just had our longest day on the summer solstice this year in June, but we're gearing up for next year. So as you see, the registration is open to celebrate and shine your light on the longest day on June 20th, 2021. So if you'd like to join, go to alz.org/TLD for the longest day.
Now I'll talk briefly about some of our resources. So our 24/7 helpline is available around the clock to provide telephonic support to the public, caregivers, and families. And we do this in many ways, but it is a great resource to be connected to community resources, support groups, education programs, and even some information on our website. So we encourage you to use this as a tool. I'd also like to talk to you a little bit about our upcoming events. Our next session for our conference series will be later this evening. And we will be talking about building your skill, but this will be for professionals. And then on Thursday, we have another series that is specific for volunteers and those who are interested in being a volunteer. And then lastly, we do have a Memory Care University series coming up, and I'd like to share with you very briefly the topics that they are. This series will start on October the 7th. The first topic or discussion will be You Cannot Keep a Good Woman Down, the impact of Alzheimer's and women caregivers or on women caregivers. Faith, family, and dementia. Having the talk, tips for difficult conversations, hospice, driving, and intimacy. And lastly, staying socially connected in a socially distanced world. And again, we would like to thank all of our sponsors for making this conference possible. Thank you again for your support. Thank you all for attending.
So this will end today's morning session. We're going to take a brief break and we're going to be back at 1 o'clock for our afternoon session. Thank you all so much. And remember, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat feature and we'll be sure to make sure we answer each one of those. We want to thank Melanie Lee for giving us her time and her talent. And great job, Lori and Annette. Thank you all and be safe.